Hey everyone, today I'm going over my Arixmethes the Slumbering Isle deck profile. I recently built Arixmethes because I picked up the Simone Duskmourn precon. I really was just going to rip it for its mana base, you know. I usually buy precons just to take out the mana base, take out the important cards, and then have a bunch of bulk. However, once I read Arixmethes, I was like, this looks like a really fun deck, you know. I'm going over this deck profile because it was requested to me recently by one of my TikTok followers. Thank you so much for your request. But yeah, after I built it, I was like, you know, I can make this pretty mean. And so I ended up doing that. If the only reason that I wanted to play Arixmethes is because I've always wanted like a big beater commander. That's one of the main reasons to play Arixmethes, right? It's not super like spell slingy. It's not super, well, at least not the way that I've built it and the way that I'm going to show you how to build it. It's not super spell slingy. It's not like a hold the fort sort of deck where you're the last person standing. It's more like I'm aggressively trying to get my opponents out of here. Keep in mind, the best removal is player removal. But anyway, the deck profile that I'm going to go over today is Arixmethes the Slumbering Isle. Super fun. I built it as like a Hydra commander. And I really hope you guys like the way that it's been built because, like, genuinely, every time I play it, it's so much fun. I've even got a fairly good win record with it, which is, like, honestly ideal. But anyway, let's go ahead and get on over to the deck profile. Like I said earlier, Arixmethes is a big beater, but that's not the only reason to play him. Once you've played Arixmethes, which I do as soon as physically possible, you get an extra 2 mana. That's super nice. But the 12/12 really does help. It is the main reason that I've played him. Speaking of mana, one of the biggest sections that I have is I need more lands. In this deck, you're going to end up needing a lot of lands because the Hydras cost a lot. Now, once you get some of the other effects out, you won't need lands like as much. It won't be as pertinent to have a bunch of lands, but towards the beginning, it is very important. In the deck, we've got lots of ways to get extra lands out. Yavimaya Elder, Growth Spiral, Eureka Moment. Of these, I think Growth Spiral is the most important because it's the cheapest one that gets you an extra land on the field. And it might not feel like ramp, but it at least does get you more mana base. We've got other ways to get extra lands on the field. Silverback Elder, Exploration, AC Tyrant of Gyre Strait. Of these, I think the most beneficial is AC, but you could argue that it's also Silverback Elder because you do cast a lot of creature spells. This version isn't necessarily the budget decklist version. If you want the budget decklist version, there's actually only one alteration. You replace Exploration with Rites of Flourishing at the cost of giving everybody else an extra land per turn and letting everybody else draw an extra card per turn. You will also be drawing an extra card and playing an extra land. Both of those things are super good in this deck. Keeping it up, we've got Planar Genesis, Beanstalk Giant, and Rampant Growth. Beanstalk Giant stands out to me here. The more lands you have, the bigger he is, and that's kind of important in this deck also. But Planar Genesis is one of my favorite cards overall. Rounding it out, there's only 2 cards left, Cultivate and Migration Path. Again, you need a lot of lands in this deck, and soon you'll see why. The next big section that we have is called Draw More Cards. Obviously, you're going to need to be drawing a lot of cards. That's the case in any deck, really. Card advantage is the biggest turning point. So let's take a look. These next 3 aren't super drawing cards, but they do give you card advantage. Retreat to Coralheim, Factor Fiction, and Threats Undetected. Threats Undetected is one of my favorite cards in most of my decks, so no surprise that it ends up in this one. Next up, we've got Careful Consideration, Brain Surge, and Disciple of the Frailes. Disciple of the Frailes works extremely well in this deck because if you flip it over, you end up with a land also. So you can use it for its land side, Garden of the Frailes, or its face side, which is the Disciple. The last card in this section is Primal Empathy. Not only is this a +1/+1 counter if you don't have the creature with the highest power, but it's also a draw spell, so this one comes in handy quite often. There's a small section of cards that I played just to keep me alive at the beginning while I'm trying to get my Hydras out. This section is affectionately dubbed, Keep Me Alive Please. We've got things like Animal Friend, Squirrel Nest, Scoot Swarm, just things to put up a bunch of chump blockers while I get my Hydras out. The other 2 cards in this section are Territorial Scythe Cat, which just got a reprint in Foundations, and Mirkwood Spider. I'm always trying to put down a 1/1 with Death Touch super early in the game. It's one of my favorite ways to keep myself protected. This next section is full of beefy boys and girls. It's called Hydra. Kicking this section off is Coma, Cosmo Serpent, Colonian Hydra, and Hydra Broodmaster. Coma Cosmo Serpent puts in so much work in this deck. Like, this card is so important for it. I think it's also important to note that in this section, AC Tyrant of Gyre Strait would fit. However, he's not in this section. He's in another section. He's more important over there. Thunderfoot Baloth is an honorary Hydra. This card makes your commander have trample, and that's super important because it's going to be a 14/14. So nice. Now, I'm sure this feels like a short section, but there's more Hydras to come, and you've already seen a couple of Hydras. Just bear with me. This next section I threw in just to give my opponent something else to think about. It's my +1/+1 section. It's got Overwhelming Encounter, Forgotten Ancient, and Simic Ascendancy. Simic Ascendancy is accidentally a win con. I've actually had to bounce this to my hand because I forgot that it was a win con and my opponents were gunning for me too hard. And Forgotten Ancient needs to be in any deck that has +1/+1 counters. Next up, we've got Roaring Earth, Unnatural Growth, and Nyxborn Hydra. That's more Hydras, more landfall, and I'll double their power at the beginning of each combat. Sure, Hydras aren't that scary, but imagine 6 of them landing at the same time. That's what this next section's about. We call it Cascade, Cascade, Cascade. Kicking it off, we have Apex Devastator, Kodama the East Tree, and Imanti, Celebrant of Bounty. Look at how many times Apex Devastator cascades. Tell me that's not going to work in this section. The only other 2 cascaders are Galta Stampede Tyrant and Rashmi Eternity's Crafter. Galta Stampede Tyrant I'll give you isn't exactly a cascade, but it kind of has the same effect that I'm looking for. This next section is about keeping us safe and keeping our opponents from doing anything we don't like. It's called Combo Breaker. Kicking it off, we've got Spell Pierce, Hopeender Codal, and Don't Make a Sound. Hopeender Codal might genuinely be the only flyer in this deck. Next up, we have Ether Spike, Counterspell, and Convolute. I really like Convolute because nobody wants to pay for it, but Counterspell is honestly probably the best Counterspell. Rounding it out, we have Twist Reality and Sink into Stupor. As you can see, Sink into Stupor also has a land built in. I named this next section Not in My House, but not because of like basketball or anything. I actually had a cousin that used to say, "Get out from my house," and I wish I could have named it that, but nobody would have gotten the reference. Next time you'll know. Anyway, here's some removal pieces. Kicking us off, we have Echoing Truth, Monstrous Emergence, and Bridgeworks Battle. Bridgeworks Battle happens to be the last card that's got a land attached to it. Let's look at some board wipes. Oversimplify, Evacuation, and Aethergale. Oversimplify is probably the best of them all in your scenario. For the most part, you're going to have a bunch of big, beefy creatures, and so board wiping everybody and making it so that you're the only one that has a creature and then recasting Arixmethes is nice. Now I know what you're thinking. Jose, you've covered absolutely everything that could possibly go in this deck. What else could you need? Little bit of protection, Keep Safe, Tameo Safekeeping, Horrid Vigor, and a little bit of land untapping, Shriekwood Devourer, and Wilderness Reclamation. And honestly, that's about it. Other than the lands, there's not much that I could tell you. I do play 37 lands in this deck, but that doesn't mean anything, really. At the end of the day, the lands that you pick are based on the cards that you pick, so I just put the cards up so that you could see them if you wanted to net deck this. That's super cool. Thank you guys for getting to this point. I super appreciate you guys following along and listening. Let me know what decks you want to see me build. Let me know if you want to see budget decks, CEDH decks, regular commander decks, budget doesn't matter decks, stuff like that. Just give me all your ideas in the comment section. Thank you guys. I'll catch you on the next one.